Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. It was late at night in Manhattan. The chill from the glass towers spilled into the narrow alley behind the Gilded Spoon. Taxi horns blared in the distance, and the sour scent of garbage mixed with expensive perfume. The familiar smell of the elite and those who served them. Hannah Scott leaned against the darkened brick wall, her phone vibrating softly in her hand. She answered. Her best friend's voice came through the speaker. "You're still on the night shift?" "Hannah, listen. Are you really going to that wedding?" Hannah didn't reply right away. In the dark, the light from her phone reflected in her eyes. Tired, restrained. "I have to, Trish. I'm working it. They booked the restaurant for the reception. I can't just not show up." A long sigh came through the line. "Alexander will be there. And, Gloria, too." That name landed like a drop of cold water. Gloria, Trisha's cousin. Tall, blonde, with a laugh like crystal bells. The one who used to borrow Hannah's lipstick and once asked about Alexander. Just out of curiosity. Now she was his fiancée. Hannah bit her lip. "I know. It's just, if I take the night off, we'll be short-staffed. And if the manager finds out..." Her voice faded. The ache in her chest climbed to her throat. "You don't owe them anything, Hannah," Trish said sharply. "You don't have to stand there and watch the man who once said he'd marry you slip a ring on someone else." Hannah let out a small, hollow laugh. "I'm just serving champagne, Trish. Not everyone gets a seat at the table." She wanted to say more, but her throat tightened. Her lips trembled. I don't want to look like a failure. He's moving on. With someone rich. Perfect. And I'm still here, wearing an apron, carrying trays." There was a pause, then Trish's voice softened. "You're not a failure. You're just in the middle of your story." Hannah smiled faintly. "That sounds like something from a movie." "Because your life is worth making into one." She didn't answer. The wind blew through the alley, sending a shiver down her spine. For a moment, tears burned hot as they slid down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, afraid someone might see, then took a deep breath and ended the call. Only the wind remained and the glow of the sign above her. The Gilded Spoon, where New York meets perfection. She stared at the words, her chest tight. Perfection, something she'd never had. 5 minutes later, Hannah walked back through the rear door, where the warm yellow light of the kitchen spilled out. She straightened her apron, hiding her red eyes beneath smudged mascara. "Table 8's asking for you, Hannah," a coworker called. "You're regular." She nodded, squared her shoulders, and stepped into the dining room. The restaurant shimmered like another world. Glittering gowns, the soft chime of crystal glasses, candlelight reflecting on mirrored ceilings. Hannah moved gracefully between tables, her black shoes gliding over the thick carpet. Then she saw him, sitting in the corner by the window, Theodore. The man who always chose the same table, the same meal, cream of mushroom soup and a half glass of red wine. He wore a simple gray sweater, out of place among the tailored suits around him. The golden light touched his dark brown hair, making him look like the calmest part of the entire room. "Good evening, Mr. Theodore," she said with a polite smile, her tone steady and professional. "The usual tonight?" "Just call me Theo," he replied. His voice was low, deep, smooth like an old jazz record. He looked up at her, his eyes warm and steady. "Rough night, Hannah." She froze, not because of what he said, but how he said it, slowly, sincerely, not like a customer making small talk. She tried to smile, but it broke into a sigh. "It's fine. Sometimes people just have to pretend they're okay, so no one asked too many questions." He tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. His gaze was quiet, perceptive, as if he could read every layer she tried to hide. "If you ever need someone to listen," he said softly, "I'm told I'm pretty good at it." The words were so gentle she thought she'd imagined them, but his eyes, calm, patient, made her believe. So she sat down across from him, her fingers lacing together. "Do you ever feel like you've been left behind?" she asked. "Like the whole world's running ahead, and you're just standing still?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze rested on her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the faint coffee stains on her hands. Everyone gets left behind sometimes, he said at last. What matters is whether you stay there or start walking again. Hannah let out a soft, shaky laugh. I used to think I was strong, but watching him be happy with someone else. She paused, her voice breaking. It feels like everything's collapsing. A gentle silence settled between them, the faint clink of silverware, the hum of jazz, and the quiet breathing of a man who was looking at her, without judgment, without pity. Maybe you just need someone to believe you deserve more, he said quietly. She looked up, startled. Their eyes met, hers weary, his understanding in a way that made her chest ache. Thank you, Theo, she whispered, smiling faintly. Sometimes just having someone listen is enough. He nodded. Then tonight, I'll be that someone. Hannah let out a small, trembling laugh, real this time. She stood, picked up her serving tray, and turned back toward the tables. Her steps felt lighter than before. She didn't know that tonight, that small conversation would be the beginning of everything that changed her life. The night rain tapped softly against the window frame of the Gilded Spoon. The restaurant was slowly emptying, with only a few tables of lingering guests. Hannah gathered the empty champagne glasses, wiped the tables with a white cloth, and tried to keep her professional smile. But after her conversation with Theodore the night before, something kept aching inside her, like someone had just shone a light on the place she'd buried her sadness for years. When she turned toward the corner table, Theodore was still there. His phone lay face down beside his glass of wine, his deep blue eyes quietly watching the street outside. The rain was thin, more like a silver mist than water. Would you like anything else, sir? She asked softly. No, it's just... You seem to be thinking a lot, he replied, the corner of his lips lifting faintly. She sat down across from him without really knowing why. Maybe because after a whole day of wearing a mask, she finally needed a place to take it off. And somehow, he was the safest place she could imagine tonight. She hesitated. Have you ever had to face the person who hurt you? Had to watch them be happy while you still haven't moved on? Theodore didn't answer right away. He swirled his glass slowly, the light above reflecting off the surface in deep crimson rings. I think everyone has someone like that, he said at last. Someone who makes us pretend we're fine while our hearts are not. Hannah gave a weak laugh. I'm pretending right now. Tomorrow morning I have to serve champagne at my ex-boyfriend's wedding. He's marrying someone else, and I'll be the one handing them the glasses. She laughed again, but it was the kind of laugh that trembled more than it amused. Theodore looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. His silence was so gentle that she felt safe enough to blurt out something she hadn't even planned. Would you? She paused, her heart pounding. Would you come with me to the wedding? Just pretend to be my husband. The air seemed to freeze. The slow jazz music hummed faintly from the speakers, and the rain outside became the only sound between them. Hannah's face flushed red. I'm sorry, I don't know what I just said. That's ridiculous. She was about to stand up when his voice stopped her. That has to be the most interesting proposal I've heard this year. She looked up. He was smiling, not with his mouth, but with his eyes warm and steady. Don't joke like that. Who said I'm joking? He replied in a lower tone. One evening, one wedding. I'll be your perfect husband. You're serious? Serious enough that I'm already wondering what I should wear for the role? She stared at him, speechless. Something in his voice made her believe him, not because he owed her anything, but because he truly wanted to do it. She laughed shakily. You don't even know me. I could be crazy or a gold digger. If you were either, he said quietly, you wouldn't have apologized right after asking. A silence stretched between them. Then Hannah exhaled, strangely relieved. I can't believe I just asked a stranger to pretend to be my husband. And I just agreed, he said with a small shrug. That seems fair. The next evening, when the knock came at the door, Hannah was still struggling to fasten the back of her dress. She opened the door and almost forgot to breathe. The man standing on her small porch was no longer the casual diner in a sweater. Theodore wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a slim tie, and a crisp white collar that gleamed under the Manhattan rain. The hallway light caught his high cheekbones, a straight nose, and deep blue eyes. He looked like he had stepped right out of a magazine cover. "You," she whispered, "you look completely different." "The role of a lawful husband requires some investment," he said softly, a playful note in his voice. She laughed, trying to hide her nerves. "You didn't have to go that far. And you shouldn't underestimate my commitment to a role." He held out his hand. "Shall we, Mrs. Scott?" The way he said it made her heart skip a beat. The wedding reception was held at an old hotel overlooking Central Park West, where crystal chandeliers hung like constellations scattered across the ceiling. As Hannah stepped inside, Theodore's hand rested lightly at her waist and just enough to make her feel protected. People turned to look. Amid their curious stares, she spotted Alexander, dressed in a silver-gray tuxedo, holding Gloria's hand. They were smiling, dazzlingly perfect together. But for the first time, Hannah didn't feel small anymore. Theodore leaned down and whispered, "Breathe. You're doing great." The warmth in his voice steadied her. He began introducing her to a few guests. "My wife, Hannah." The words came so naturally that even she almost believed them. Under the shimmering lights, he looked as though he belonged in this world. Confident, composed, effortlessly charming. When he smiled at her, she almost forgot she was just a waitress. Throughout the evening, he played the part flawlessly. One hand held her glass, the other brushed hers gently as they walked past curious eyes. Everyone believed them. Until an older gentleman stopped nearby, squinting at Theodore. "Wait a minute. I know you. You're—" His voice rose just enough for everyone around to hear. "My God, that's Theodore Vandenberg, the owner of the Gilded Spoon. I can't believe you're here." The air froze. The music faltered for half a beat. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Vandenberg. That name. It was printed on every paycheck she'd ever received. She turned toward him, eyes wide. He met her gaze with the same composed smile. But this time, there was something else in it. Guilt. A secret. "You're—" she whispered, her voice catching. He tilted his head, murmuring just for her, "I suppose there were a few small details I forgot to mention." The world tilted. The lights, the laughter, the music, all dissolved into a dizzying blur. The man she'd thought was just a kind stranger was, in fact, her billionaire boss. Hannah stood frozen in the middle of the grand hall, her glass trembling in her hand. And in that moment, surrounded by luxury and murmured astonishment, one thought echoed in her mind. "I asked the wrong man to pretend to be my husband." The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the old curtains, spilling across the kitchen table where unpaid bills lay scattered in uneven stacks. Hannah sat by the window in an oversized sweater, both hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. In front of her was a blank sheet of paper bearing a shaky opening line. "Dear Manager of the Gilded Spoon." She had been writing and rewriting the letter all morning, but every time she reached the signature line, her hand froze. On her phone screen flashed the morning headline, "Young Culinary Empire CEO seen with mystery woman at high society New York wedding." Below the caption was a photo, his profile in a black tuxedo, her in a simple blue dress. America was talking. Hannah just had a headache. She couldn't keep working at the restaurant owned by the man she had accidentally proposed to. She couldn't face her coworkers, or worse, him. She gripped the pen, inhaled. "Okay, just finish it. Send it. Start over." But just as she pressed the pen down, there came a knock at the door. 3 knocks. Slow, steady, confident. Her brows furrowed. Who would come at this hour? When she opened the door, she froze. Theodore stood there. Dark jeans, white shirt with the sleeves rolled, and 2 steaming paper cups of coffee in his hands. "I figured I should come before you disappeared." It took her a few seconds to find her voice. "What are you doing here?" He held out 1 cup. "Bringing you caffeine. And talking about the wedding last night." Hannah's cheeks flamed as she looked away. "You don't have to. I already wrote my resignation letter. You don't need to worry about that." "That?" His brow arched, voice low but faintly amused. "You mean the wedding where you turned a CEO into your fake husband?" I didn't even know who you were, she blurted out, then winced at her own volume. You pretended to be some broke guy in a sweater, drinking cheap wine. I thought, you thought I was ordinary, he interrupted gently, smiling. You were right. Sometimes I like being ordinary. She crossed her arms. If you came here to make fun of me, you can stop. I really am quitting. He shook his head, his expression turning serious. No, I came to negotiate. Before she could stop him, Theodore stepped into the small apartment. Morning light brushed his hair, softening his usual composure. He set both coffees on the table, glancing around. The room was tiny. One old armchair, a short bookshelf, and a small cactus by the window. This place says more about you than anything you told me last night, he murmured. Real, modest, warm. She frowned. You came here to compliment my apartment? He chuckled softly. No, to make you an offer. Her eyes narrowed. Another act. Something like that. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, gaze steady. You needed a husband for one night to save face, and he paused, his tone dropping, need a wife for one weekend. She stared at him. You're joking. I wish I were. He gave a rueful smile. My mother, Eleanor Vandenberg, she's hosting her 40th wedding anniversary in the Hamptons this weekend. She's traditional and obsessed with marrying me off. She's already lined up a few suitable candidates, all chosen for their family names, not who they are. And you want me to rescue you from the rich girls club? Something like that. He reached into his jacket and laid an envelope on the table. If you agree to come with me to the Hamptons and pretend to be my wife for the weekend, this is your compensation. She peeked inside. A check. The number made her breath catch. You're insane. Probably, he shrugged lightly. But I'm not letting myself be auctioned off for politics. My mother can't interfere if I'm already married. I just need to keep up the act until the celebration ends. After that, we go our separate ways. She looked at the check again, her mind spinning. That amount could pay off her student loans, clear every bill, and even fund her mother's leg surgery back in Ohio. It could change everything. But I don't belong in your world. Neither do I, he said without hesitation. But when you're around, it feels a little less suffocating. The words silenced her. Outside, Manhattan traffic hummed steadily, like the beat of her racing heart. Are you sure about this? I'm just a waitress. If your mother finds out, she'll lose her mind. Exactly what I'm counting on. His grin was crooked, daring. You'll help me do what no one in New York finance has ever dared, confuse Eleanor Vandenberg. She looked at him, part bewildered, part impressed. You're dangerous. Only if you see me that way. A long pause stretched between them. Finally, Hannah exhaled and gave a faint, nervous smile. I can't believe I'm about to say this. Then don't. Just nod. He lifted a brow. She hesitated, then nodded. Theodore rose, a slow smile curving his lips. He extended his hand. Thank you, Mrs. Vandenberg. Temporarily. Hannah took his hand, trembling, half terrified, half thrilled. I have no idea what I just agreed to. Just one weekend, he said. No strings, no feelings. She laughed under her breath. Sounds exactly like a movie line. And you know, he added, eyes glinting, movies that start with just pretend never end that way. Hannah released his hand, trying to hide her smile. She had no idea that within days that weekend would alter the entire course of her life, forever. 3 days after their agreement, Hannah found herself standing in Theodore's high-rise apartment in Tribeca. She had never been anywhere like it. Glass walls overlooking the Hudson, dark wooden floors, every detail so refined it made even silence feel expensive. On the table, he had opened his laptop, a presentation slide glowing on the screen. Written across it in neat chalk-like handwriting were the words, Temporary Guide for Mrs. Vandenberg. Hannah laughed, half dizzy. You're actually serious about this? If we're going to play the part, he said calmly, pouring her a glass of water, we might as well do it properly. My grandmother will ask everything. How we met, why I fell in love with you. If you hesitate for even a second, she'll smell it. She crossed her arms. So, where do we start? First, pretend you've already married me. Second, pretend you like it. Hannah raised an eyebrow. The second one sounds harder. Theodore chuckled softly. Try me. He took her to a small restaurant in Soho. Not luxurious, just a cozy room with 8 tables, amber light, and live jazz. The waiter greeted him by name, proof that he was a regular. Every couple needs a special place, he said, pulling out her chair. This will be ours. When my mother asks where we met, I'll say, Soho, by the window between the scent of wine and the sound of jazz. You're good at making up stories, she teased. Not stories, he said quietly. Memories. Something in his eyes made her fall silent. Behind that polished smile was a deep weariness. The kind of loneliness only a man who has everything but no one to trust could understand. They ate dinner like a real couple, talking about work, habits, and their pasts. He asked, any strange habits I should know about? I like to rewrite customers' receipts, she admitted. I try to guess their personalities by how they tip. And what's your conclusion about me? You tip too much, which means you're trying to make up for something. He laughed. Oh, you're dangerous, Hannah Scott. A few days later, Theodore hired a private photographer. We'll need a few happy couple photos so my mother doesn't get suspicious, he explained. She wore a simple white dress. He wore a blue shirt. They laughed together in Central Park while the camera clicked. After one shot, the photographer lowered the camera and said softly, I don't think you two need much direction. The way you look at each other, it's real. Hannah wanted to deny it, but when she glanced at the photo on the screen, she froze. Her smile, his gaze, it all looked too natural. That night, Theodore texted her, Thank you for today. You did great. She replied, You too, Mr. Perfect Husband. His final message came a minute later. Don't say that. That role feels more real than it should. That weekend, he took her to the airport. Where are we going? Paris. For what? For photos, he said with a half smile. My mother doesn't believe anything without proof. She gave him a skeptical look, but when the plane lifted off and the New York skyline sank into the clouds, it felt like leaving one world for another. Paris welcomed them with light rain and the distant sound of church bells. Instead of a luxury hotel, he brought her to a small apartment overlooking the Seine, simple, warm, and smelling of bread and fresh coffee. I thought you'd stay in a 5-star hotel, she said. Real couples can laugh anywhere, he replied. Pretending requires comfort. The real thing doesn't. That day they wandered through cobblestone streets, took pictures near old bookstores, and laughed when a flower vendor mistook them for newlyweds. Hannah didn't know when she began to forget what was real and what was an act. All she knew was that every time he lifted the camera and said, Smile, her heart trembled for real. On their last night, they went to the Eiffel Tower. The rain had stopped, the pavement still glimmering with light. Golden reflections shimmered in his eyes. Smile, he said softly, lifting his phone, as if you were in love. Hannah looked at him, really looked. The light fell over his shoulders, his hair, his breath. What if I really am? She whispered so quietly the wind almost swallowed it. He paused, just for a second. But in that second, something shifted in his gaze. Softer, truer. Then I'll have to pretend harder, he said. So you don't find out. She laughed, but the sound broke into silence. The Eiffel Tower flickered behind them, its lights pulsing every 5 minutes. And Hannah felt her heart beating in time with it. She no longer knew if she was still acting. All she knew was that in that moment, beneath the dazzling Paris sky, with her heart racing in rhythm with the city, she truly felt in love. The road leading to the Vandenberg estate stretched between rows of maple trees, their leaves trembling in the sea breeze. As the black Bentley turned through the iron gates, Hannah held her breath. Ahead stood a palace, pure white with domed roofs, towering windows, a swan-shaped fountain glistening in the courtyard, and grand mahogany doors polished to a mirror shine. The noon sun struck the marble walls, turning them to silver. She swallowed hard, feeling like an imposter in a fairy tale. Are you sure this is a house, not a museum? She whispered, half joking, half trembling. Theodore glanced at her, his smile calm and unreadable. Welcome to a world where roses make the fences and silence means power. The doors opened. A butler bowed low and led them into the grand hall. Hannah's breath caught. A vaulted ceiling, chandeliers glittering like galaxies, polished marble floors, twin spiral staircases mirroring each other. She whispered, afraid her voice might echo too loudly. If your mother's here, I think I should learn how to breathe quieter. He leaned close to her ear. Just remember, you're Mrs. Vandenberg. No one gets to make you feel small. But before the reassurance could sink in, a voice cut through the air. Sharp, elegant, and edged like silk drawn over glass. Oh, so this is the woman who managed to surprise my son. Hannah turned. Mrs. Eleanor Vandenberg, tall, silver blonde, draped in classic Dior, approached with the poise of a queen. Each step was a metronome of authority. Her eyes swept over Hannah, from hair to shoes, assessing, dissecting. You hid her well, Theo, she said, her tone smooth but laced with frost. I didn't imagine the woman who captured your heart would be so. A pause, a hint of disdain. Ain't simple. The air thickened. Hannah straightened her back, forcing the kind of polite smile that took all her strength. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vandenberg. Is it? Eleanor's lips curved faintly. We'll see how long that pleasure lasts. Theodore's voice was low but firm. Mother, she's my wife. At least have the decency to treat her as such. A tense silence followed. Mother and son locked in a quiet war of stares. Finally, Eleanor turned. Your room is ready. Dinner at 7. Don't be late. When her figure disappeared up the staircase, Hannah exhaled like she'd survived a storm. I think she just evaluated me like I was a product. Correct, Theodore said, taking her hand lightly. And you just confused her. That doesn't happen often. The welcome dinner was held in a dining room so vast that every word echoed off marble and glass. The guests, politicians, financiers, Hampton socialites, looked like they'd stepped out of luxury magazines. Every conversation was polite, musical, and hiding something. Hannah sat beside Theodore, doing her best to play the billionaire's wife. He sat tall, composed, his hand resting gently on the back of her chair. A small gesture that made her feel just a little less out of place. When the waiter poured the wine, Theodore leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. If anyone asks, we met at a bookstore in Soho. You were reading Pride and Prejudice. I asked to borrow your lighter. You said, lighters aren't for paper, Mr. Darcy. And I knew I was doomed. She stifled a laugh. You even memorized the dialogue? I wrote the script. A silver-haired woman across the table smiled at them. So how long have you two been married? Without missing a beat, Theodore replied, 6 months. Still, on our honeymoon, as my mother insists on calling it. Laughter rippled down the table. Hannah smiled, nodding, trying to keep her pulse from giving her away. As the chatter went on, she stole a glance at him. Theodore looked too perfect to be real. The posture, the composed charm, the effortless confidence. You're good at this, she murmured as he filled her glass. I'm not acting, he said softly. She froze. Was he teasing or telling the truth? His eyes met hers, calm, steady, unflinching. For a moment, the glittering room faded, and there was only him, and that gaze that felt far too honest. When the dinner finally ended, Hannah slipped out into the garden glowing with fairy lights. The air smelled of roses and salt from the Hampton Sea. She sank onto a wooden bench, slipped off her heels and rubbed her sore feet. Trying to escape? His voice came from behind. She turned. Theodore was there, 2 glasses of wine in hand, his jacket casually slung over his shoulder. Not escaping, just resting. Those people tire me out more than a double shift. Welcome to my world. He handed her a glass. She took a sip. The bitterness bloomed on her tongue. They look at me like I'm entertainment. They look because they don't understand you, he said quietly. But I do. She laughed under her breath, about to tease him, but his gaze silenced her. Theodore, I just want you to know, he said softly, voice dipping lower, that here, no matter how loud the world gets, you still have me. A breeze swept through, cool and fragrant, Her fingers tightened around the glass. Her heart stumbled. "You should remember," she said, half whisper, half warning. "We're just pretending." "I know," he murmured. "But if we're pretending, I want it to look as real as possible." He lifted his glass, tapped it gently against hers, and drank. The garden lights flickered against his face, half shadow, half gold. And Hannah realized that some roles are played so well, you forget where the acting ends and where the feeling begins. The second dinner at the Vandenberg estate unfolded inside a dining room, nearly 20 meters long, its high ceiling glowing under amber chandeliers. Silver cutlery gleamed, crystal glasses caught the light, and white linens turned the table into a stage, with Hannah in her simple teal dress as the only performer who didn't belong. She sat beside Theodore, careful to eat slowly, properly. The soft clink of cutlery mingled with the brittle laughter of the upper class, laughter that sounded like shattering glass. Everything was perfectly rehearsed until Eleanor set down her glass of wine. "I hear," the older woman began, her voice smooth and sharp, "that my son met his wife in a diner?" The air froze. Hannah lifted her head, fingers tightening around her napkin. "Yes, ma'am. I used to work as a waitress." "A waitress," Eleanor interrupted coolly. "And what exactly made my son want to marry one?" The room fell silent. No one moved. Even the string quartet seemed to pause mid-note. Hannah could feel the weight of a dozen stares pressing down on her. Her throat went dry. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. Theodore set down his fork. He didn't react in haste. He simply looked at his mother, and the faintest smile curved his lips. Calm, dangerous. "Actually," he said, voice low and steady, "I met Hannah in a little bookstore." Sunlight was streaming through the window. She was reading Pride and Prejudice, and I stood there, completely forgetting what I came in for. The table was utterly still. "She didn't even notice me," he continued, glancing toward Hannah. "But when she smiled, I thought, maybe that's why people believe in fate." Hannah stared at him, speechless. That was the story they'd rehearsed, yet now he was saying it differently. His tone had softened, turned real, too real. "And when she finally looked up," he said quietly, "I knew my life had just changed. Because for the first time, someone saw me, not as a Vandenberg, but as a man." A hush followed, then unexpectedly, a ripple of laughter. Gentle, approving, tinged with envy. "My goodness," a gentleman murmured, "straight out of a classic romance." Eleanor raised her glass, her smile thin as a blade. "How romantic." But her eyes were cold. Hannah didn't dare look her way. Under the table, she felt Theodore's hand close around hers, firm, reassuring. When she turned slightly, his gaze met hers, warm enough to undo her composure. She looked away quickly, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. When the evening finally came to an end, Eleanor excused herself early, claiming fatigue. The chatter faded. Hannah slipped into the garden, surrounded by perfectly trimmed white roses and winding stone paths. The Hamptons breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers. She removed her heels and walked barefoot over the grass, grateful for a moment without scrutiny. "Running away from me?" came Theodore's voice behind her. She turned. He stood under the garden lights, tie undone, collar open, 2 glasses of red wine in his hands. The glow softened his features, making him look both elegant and dangerously near. "I just wanted to breathe without being interviewed," she murmured. "I'd say you handled the crowd beautifully." "You told that story too well," she said, taking the offered glass. "Even I believed it." He smiled faintly. "Not all of it was fiction." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "The part about the bookstore," he said softly, his eyes steady on hers. "The ending was real." Her heartbeat stumbled. The lights shimmered across his face, reflecting in his deep blue eyes. "Theodore," she whispered, words catching in her throat. He set down his glass on the stone table and took a step closer. Now there was only a breath between them. "Tonight, when my mother asked why I chose you," he said quietly, "I almost told her, because you make me forget who I'm supposed to be." I didn't have the courage. The world blurred. The distant waves, the faint laughter, the hum of the party. All that remained was the sound of her pulse. Then he leaned in. The kiss came slowly, carefully, as though he feared the dream might shatter if he moved too fast. At first, it was barely a touch, light as the taste of wine. But when she didn't pull away, it deepened, grew real, warm, unmistakably alive. Behind them, a few late guests stepped into the garden, and Hannah heard a whisper of surprise. "Oh my, they're kissing!" But Theodore didn't stop. His hand slid to her back, pulling her closer, until the night itself seemed to hold its breath. The garden lights gleamed on her hair, her dress, her trembling smile. That kiss was no longer an act. It was a confession without words, the only truth in a world full of pretense. When they finally broke apart, Hannah's breath trembled, her cheeks flushed. She didn't dare open her eyes. Theodore leaned in, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "Sorry, I forgot this was supposed to be a performance." She opened her eyes and saw for the first time that he no longer looked like the man who controlled everything. In the dazzling rose garden of the Vandenberg estate, under the gaze of 100 curious eyes, something real had just begun, and both of them knew. There was no going back. New York greeted them with a cold, early-season rain. The car stopped in front of Vandenberg Tower, the place where everything had begun and where it was about to end. Inside the elevator, Hannah stayed silent. The fluorescent light cast a pale reflection on her face, distant, drained. Theodore stood beside her, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. Only when the elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor did he finally speak. "It's done. My mother believes us for now. We don't need to continue this." He placed a check on the table, along with a small envelope. "This is your final payment, including a bonus for your flawless performance." Hannah tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "So that's really it?" "Yes, the contract's over. You're free." The word free came out as softly as a breath, but it fell heavy in her chest like a stone. She nodded, her voice tight. "I understand. Thank you. For everything." She turned away and walked quickly toward the door. The elevator closed behind her, reflecting her face, wet from the rain and from tears. Back in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, Hannah set the check on the table and stared at the number printed on it. It was enough to clear all her debts, pay her sister's tuition, and even open the cafe she had always dreamed of. She should have felt happy, but in the quiet room, the only sound was silence itself. No more text messages, no more low, steady voice in the mornings, no more coffee he brought her on his way to work. Only the soft tapping of rain against the window. She lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering why losing a pretend relationship could hurt more than losing something real. In the glass tower, Theodore wasn't sleeping either. He sat alone in his dark office, the city lights outside scattered across the windows like dim constellations. On his desk sat the coffee mug she used to favor, still faintly scented with mint. He closed his eyes and remembered that night in the rose garden. Her eyes, her lips, the moment he'd whispered, "I'm sorry, I forgot we were acting." Since then, he hadn't slept through a single night. He had spent his entire life in control of everything, yet he was completely powerless against one small waitress. "It's over," he said to himself, but his voice came out as nothing more than a sigh. 2 weeks later, at the Gilded Spoon, Hannah was wiping a table when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I was hoping I'd find you here." She turned. Alexander. The tailored suit, the same polished smile, the one that used to melt her heart. "Gloria and I broke up," he said quietly. "I realized you're the only one who was real." Hannah stood still. That line, "once upon a time," would have made her cry with joy. Now it only stirred a hollow ache inside her. "I want you back. Alexander, I'm not sure I'm the same girl anymore." He reached for her hand. "We can start over. Have dinner with me tonight, please." His voice was still warm, still safe, the kind of safety she used to crave. She nodded, more out of habit than hope. "Just dinner." No one noticed the man sitting in the shadowed corner of the restaurant. Theodore had come for a business meeting until he saw her and Alexander. They were talking. Alexander leaned in, holding her hand. Hannah smiled. A tired, gentle smile. A sudden surge of jealousy burned through Theodore, sharp and uncontrollable. His pulse quickened. The words he'd buried for weeks finally clawed to the surface. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone. "David," he said to the restaurant manager, his voice low, firm, "there's an emergency in the basement. A pipe leak. I want every staff member to stay and handle it." "Everyone, understand?" David stammered. "But sir, there's no—" "Now, David." He hung up, gripping his glass so tightly the rim cracked. Just as Hannah was about to leave with Alexander, David rushed over, breathless. "Hannah, there's a problem downstairs. Mr. Vandenberg just called. We need someone in charge immediately." Alexander frowned. "He still pulls strings here, doesn't he?" I should check it out," she said quickly, slipping toward the back. When she pushed open the kitchen door, the room was empty, except for him. Theodore stood there, sleeves rolled up, expression shadowed. "So you're the emergency, huh?" she said tightly. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, his eyes full of everything he'd been trying not to say. "You already said it all, didn't you? The contract's over. I'm free. So why are you—" "I can't let you go, Hannah." His voice cracked. She froze. "What did you just say?" He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, as if afraid she'd vanish. "I tried," he said quietly. "I thought I could go back to my old life, keep you out of my head. But every time I see you, every time I imagine you with someone else—" He stopped, clenching his fists. "I lose control. I was wrong to think it was just an act. Because his voice trembled, "I love you." Silence. Outside, rain lashed the windows. The wind howled through the streets of New York. Hannah stood there, eyes glistening, hands trembling. She wanted to speak, to yell, to forgive, to do something, but her heart only pounded, fast and unsteady. "You love me?" "I love you," he repeated, every word solid and raw. "Not because of the contract, not because of the part we played, just because it's you." She took a step back, but her tears fell before reason could stop them. The room was empty except for the two of them, and a truth that could never be undone. Theodore looked at her, fear flickering behind his blue eyes. He had just stripped away every layer of armor, standing there with nothing but his bare heart. "If you want to walk away, I won't stop you," he said softly. "But if there's even a piece of you that still feels something, just tell me, so I can breathe again." The rain hadn't stopped. Droplets beat against the restaurant's window pane, reflecting the city's neon light. The same cold glow Hannah had once found beautiful now only made her feel exhausted. She stood before Theodore, her shoulders trembling, not from the chill, but from holding herself together. His shirt was soaked, his hair disheveled, and his voice still echoed in her head, repeating like a broken heartbeat, "I love you." 3 simple words, the kind most girls dream of hearing. But for Hannah, they came too late. After the lies, the contracts, the money, and the kisses that weren't supposed to mean anything, but somehow did. She looked up at him, tears still running, but her voice no longer shook. "You said you loved me, right?" Theodore nodded. The pride that usually filled his eyes was gone. In its place was the fear of a man who had just lost something he couldn't buy back. "Then listen carefully," she whispered. "If you really love me, prove it." He opened his mouth, but she raised her hand, stopping him. "Not with money, not with power, not with the beautiful words you use when you negotiate." The rain outside struck harder, punctuating each word she said. "Prove it with understanding," she continued, her voice firm. "Show me that you actually see me, not as someone to save or to fix, but as who I really am." Theodore was silent. The light from the restaurant cast fractured reflections across his face, half shadow, half gold, mirroring the chaos inside him. "You're asking me to do something," he said quietly, almost confessing, "that I've never known how to do." "Good," she replied. "Then learn." He frowned. "Learn? In how long?" 24 hours. 24 hours? To do what?" "To prove your love is real." "And if I can't?" Hannah took a deep breath. Tears fell again, but her gaze was steady. Then let me go. For real this time. No contracts, no emergencies, no lies. She turned toward the door. Her shadow stretched across the hallway light, fragile, trembling, but unyielding. Before the door closed, she said without looking back, "For once I want you to fight, not to win, but to understand." Then she disappeared into the rain. The Vandenberg office felt unusually cold. Theodore hadn't moved from where she left him. The phone on his desk buzzed endlessly. Board alerts, shareholder messages, assistants waiting for orders. He ignored them all. He could buy a company with a few signatures, save an empire with a single deal, stop a crisis with one phone call. But tonight, he couldn't figure out how to hold on to one woman. Not with money, not with power, not with the naked heart he barely knew how to use. Her voice replayed in his head. Not with money. Each syllable cut deep, sharper than any loss he'd ever known. He looked around the room. Everything was perfect. The polished ebony desk, the Italian leather chair, the glass wall overlooking the city. All of it suddenly felt meaningless. Theodore sat down, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time in his life, he had no plan. When night bled into morning, he still hadn't closed his eyes. The coffee on his desk had gone cold. The phone was silent now. In his mind, there was only her, Hannah's eyes, her voice, her laughter in the rose garden, and the look in her face when she said, "You don't understand me." He rose abruptly. He couldn't leave it like this. He couldn't let their story end in silence. But how? All his life, he'd relied on money, power, and control. The very things Hannah saw as chains. He needed something different, something real. Then he remembered that evening in her tiny apartment. The warm lamplight, the faint smell of coffee, the peace she carried in her voice when she'd said, "I wish I had a place of my own. Small, warm, with shelves of books, the smell of coffee, and a corner where people can just sit and read quietly." He'd only smiled at the time. Now, that sentence was the only compass he had left. Not with money, but with understanding. Theodore closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he listened, truly listened, to every word she had ever said, every small thing she'd ever wanted, every moment he'd overlooked while believing he already knew what love meant. Hannah didn't sleep that night. His words kept echoing in her mind, like a distant melody she couldn't turn off. "I'll prove it." Not with money, with understanding. She had met so many men who claimed to love her, yet never listened. She didn't believe Theodore could possibly understand the life of a waitress, a life spent bowing, smiling, and swallowing insults as part of the job. But the next morning, when she walked into the grand lobby of the Gilded Spoon, she froze. Beneath the chandeliers and the soft notes of a piano, a man was awkwardly stacking plates, white shirt, black vest, apron neatly tied. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning, colleague." She nearly dropped the tray in her hands. "What on earth are you doing, Theodore?" "Not Theodore," he said, grinning. "Just Theo, temporary morning staff." "You applied for a job here?" "Yup, 24 hours. I want to understand your world, not from the table, but from the kitchen." Trish, her friend and coworker, passed by the bar and raised an eyebrow. "He says he's your temporary boyfriend doing field research." The boss approved it. "Hannah, make sure he survives the shift." Hannah sighed, glancing from Trish to him. "All right, Theo. Start by wiping the tables." A restaurant in the morning was a whole different universe. The clatter of silverware, the chef shouting orders, waiters rushing past each other. Theodore stood in the middle, holding a tray of wine as if it were an alien artifact. "Not that high," Hannah said, lowering his arm. "If you spill, the customer complains, and I'm the one who has to apologize." "Yes, boss," he said with a half smile, trying to mimic her stance. One glass slipped and shattered. Everyone turned to look. Hannah closed her eyes, ready to snap, but stopped when she saw him crouch down, carefully picking up the shards. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'll clean it." No excuses, no power plays, just a man, one who used to have paths cleared before him, now on his knees, cleaning the floor with care. The head chef passed by and muttered, "Not bad. At least he knows how to apologize." Hannah turned away, a faint smile tugging at her lips. By lunchtime, the restaurant was packed. Theodore carried trays, took orders, and poured wine. He fumbled, dropped a fork, and endured a rude customer calling him clumsy. He simply smiled and bowed. "I'm sorry, sir." Hannah watched from nearby, her chest tightening. She had heard those same words, endured that same tone, with no one ever stepping in for her. Now the man who once sat in the VIP section was enduring it himself, just to understand her. During the break, he found her in the back kitchen. His sleeves were rolled up, sweat dampening his hair. "I never realized standing for 10 straight hours could feel like this," he said, breathing hard. "It's not even rush hour yet," she teased, but her voice softened. "Now I understand why you always came home late. And why didn't you have energy left for anyone else?" She looked at him. His eyes were so honest she had to turn away, hiding the emotion rising in her throat. Night fell, and the restaurant glittered again. The jazz band played. Wealthy guests laughed over wine. Hannah straightened his vest and whispered, "If a customer complains, just smile. Don't argue. Like when I try explaining things to my mother," he teased. "No," she said. "Here, smiling is survival." He nodded, quiet now. At table 12, a woman checked her reflection in a compact mirror before snapping, "Waiter, this wine isn't chilled enough." "Do you even know who I am?" Theodore replied evenly. "I do, ma'am. But whoever you are, I still want your wine to taste the way it should." The woman blinked, then smiled, embarrassed but impressed. Hannah couldn't help it. She smiled too. Near midnight, the restaurant fell silent. The lights dimmed, the jazz faded. The staff trickled out until only two people remained beneath the chandeliers, Hannah and Theodore. She sat at a corner table, too tired to even untie her apron. He set a glass of red wine in front of her, her favorite kind. "I mixed it wrong," he admitted, "but you once said Merlot helps you sleep. You remembered that?" "I remember everything you've ever said." She laughed softly, her voice hoarse. "Well, congratulations. You did it. You really understand me now." "I understand," he said quietly, "and I love you, Hannah. No more pretending." She looked at him, his shirt wrinkled, sweat still on his brow, his hands roughened from the day's work. No longer a cold CEO, just a man who had learned to bend, to listen, to care. "I didn't bring you a gift," he said slowly. "All I could give was one day in your world, one day beside you, and I don't want it to end." She was silent for a long moment, then placed her hand over his. "It doesn't have to end," she said softly. "We can start from here." He looked up. The crystal lights reflected in their eyes. No contracts, no pretending. "You mean that?" he asked. "I do." She smiled, eyes shimmering. "Not because of the 24 hours you worked, but because, in those hours, you were real." Theodore took her hand and drew her closer. "So, does that mean I can kiss the waitress now?" "Only after you clear the table," she murmured. He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound, before leaning in. Beneath the chandeliers where their story had once been an act, their kiss was slow, warm, and true. No audience, no cameras, just two people from different worlds who had finally met in the same light, and knew this time love was no longer a contract. A few months later, autumn had returned to Manhattan. Maple leaves blazed gold along Greenwich Avenue, and the wind carried the scent of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the faint hum of jazz spilling from a nearby street corner. On a hand-carved wooden sign hung above a small doorway were the words written in soft cursive, "Hannah's Place," and just below it, a small tagline, like a promise. A cup, a book, a heart. On opening day, as the doors swung wide, the aroma of warm coffee drifted out, mingling with the scent of new books. Inside, amber lights glowed against wooden tables lining the windows. Black and white photographs of rainy New York hung on the walls, and a tall shelf brimmed with well-loved books. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't loud. It was simply warm as Hannah's smile. She stood behind the counter wearing a beige apron, her hair tied neatly, eyes bright as though she'd never known a day of exhaustion. Beside her, Theodore, sleeves rolled up, crisp white shirt, chuckled as she corrected the chalkboard menu. You spelled latte wrong, she said. I was going for artistic flair. No, in here we only serve what's real. No half creativity allowed. Yes, Mrs. Real. She laughed and nudged his shoulder. People began to pour in. College students with laptops, an office worker wearing a red scarf, an elderly couple holding hands, and a few curious journalists whispering about the cafe owned by CEO Vandenberg. But no one saw a billionaire here, only a man brewing coffee, wiping tables, and smiling honestly. In one corner stood a small bookshelf with a handwritten sign, "Take one, leave one," because knowledge and kindness should both be shared. On each table, a vase of white baby's breath and a small sign read, "Today's coffee, love just strong enough." Trish, now the cafe manager, rushed over breathlessly. "Hannah, you have a special guest." Hannah turned and froze. Mrs. Eleanor. She entered in a deep blue dress, a string of pearls at her neck. The entire cafe seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Her gaze swept slowly over the space, the shelves, the photos, the lights, the steaming cups of coffee. Finally, she stopped before the counter where Hannah stood. Gone was the cold, imperious look from that afternoon in the Hamptons. Her voice was low, steady, and roughened with emotion. "You have a fine eye, Hannah. This place, it truly belongs to my son." Hannah hesitated, then smiled gently and bowed her head. "Thank you, ma'am, but I think it belongs to both of us." Mrs. Eleanor nodded slightly, then turned away, her eyes glistening, pretending no one saw the tears she was holding back. When night fell, Hannah's place glowed in golden light. The cafe was still full, the small band playing La Vie en Rose. Theodore stepped up to the little stage, microphone in hand, his voice warm and smooth like red wine. "Tonight," he said, "I have something to say. I used to think greatness meant building companies, chasing numbers, holding power. But he looked toward Hannah, she taught me that greatness isn't about wealth. It's about finding the person you want to share your morning coffee with for the rest of your life." Applause filled the cafe. Hannah stood behind the counter, tears shimmering, lips trembling in a smile. He stepped down, walked toward her. No stage lights, no audience needed, only that gaze. Steady, gentle, true. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box and opened it. Inside, a sapphire ring, the same blue as his eyes. "Hannah Scott," he said, voice quivering slightly. "Will you marry me? For real this time? No contract, no act, just truth." The cafe went silent. Hannah's hand covered her mouth as a tear fell onto her knuckles. She nodded, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, I will." He smiled and slipped the ring onto her finger. Cheers erupted. Trish shouted from the back, "Finally! I've been betting on this since chapter 3. They both laughed through their tears. Theodore pulled her close and whispered against her ear, "The first time I kissed you, it was to keep a secret. This time, it's to tell the truth." Then he kissed her, amidst the music, the lights, and the sweet scent of coffee. When the night quieted and the last customers had gone, Hannah sat by the window, her head resting on his shoulder, watching the reflection of Hannah's place in the glass. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think love only existed in fairy tales. And I used to think love wasn't for people too busy chasing money. And now?" "Now," he said with a smile, "I just want to wash the cups while you brew the coffee." She laughed, squeezing his hand. Outside, New York shimmered under the city lights, the distant hum of cars fading into the night. Inside the small cafe, the air was rich with the scent of coffee and happiness. A story that began with a fake contract had ended with a real proposal. Winter in New York. The wind carried the scent of roasted coffee and pastries from the corner of Greenwich Street. Amid the noise and rush of the city, Hannah's place glowed in soft amber light, warm, intimate, like a dream that refused to end. There was no grand wedding dress, no choir, no ballroom. Only the people who truly mattered. Trish, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Mrs. Eleanor sitting proudly in the front row, and a few loyal customers who had witnessed the cafe from its first day. Hannah stepped out from behind the counter in a simple white dress, her hair tied back with a silver ribbon. Theodore waited for her at the center of the cafe. Charcoal gray suit, a smile both proud and tender. The smile of a man who had once possessed everything, but only learned happiness when he found one person worth keeping. The light bounced off the coffee cups on every table, scattering like tiny stars. La Vie en Rose began to play, and Trish was already crying. "Are you crying again, Trish?" Hannah whispered. "Sorry," her friend sniffled. "I still remember you washing dishes during the night shift, and now you're marrying the owner." "You make it sound like a movie." "Not a movie," Trish laughed through her tears. "A fairy tale." The whole cafe chuckled softly. When Hannah reached him, Theodore took her hand. There was no priest, no elaborate vows, only his quiet voice. "I don't have a speech memorized, but I do have a contract, one you wrote, and I'm ready to sign." She smiled and handed him a framed sheet of paper under clear glass. In her delicate handwriting, the title read, "The Forever Agreement. Laugh every day, never go to bed angry. Always share morning coffee. And Theodore Vandenberg will pretend to be Hannah's husband. For life." He laughed, eyes glimmering with moisture. "This contract sounds binding. Irrevocable. Then I'll sign it. With my heart." He signed it, and the cafe erupted in applause. The music shifted. The lights dimmed to gold. They danced between the tables. The same tables that once held her tips and his business cards, now holding their future. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, silent flakes. The moonlight glowed through the window and touched the wooden sign that read Hannah's Place, making it shimmer like something carved out of a storybook. "Who would have thought," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder, "that begging a stranger to play my husband would lead me to the love of my life?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "I was never a stranger, Hannah. I was just waiting for you to find me." She looked up at him, those sapphire eyes still carrying the same warmth as the first night he smiled at her from the corner table of the restaurant. He kissed her. Not the impulsive kiss of a scene, not one hidden behind a contract, but the kiss of two ordinary people who had survived pride, distance, and fear, and finally chose each other. Afterward, glasses of champagne clinked, music swayed gently, and laughter filled the air. Eleanor walked up, resting her hand on her son's shoulder, her eyes glistening. "I used to be afraid you'd choose the wrong woman," she said softly. "Now I'm afraid you'll love her too much." "I'm ready for that," Theodore smiled. "I know." She turned to Hannah, her voice tender. "Welcome home, dear." Hannah squeezed her hand, speechless, her eyes bright with tears that shimmered like morning dew. Trish raised her glass. "A toast to the only contract on earth that everyone wants to sign." Laughter and the chime of glass filled the cafe, blending with the soft music and the comforting aroma of coffee. The next morning, Manhattan woke to its usual rhythm, cabs honking, people rushing. But on the second floor above Hannah's Place, peace lingered like a secret. Coffee simmered on the stove. Golden light spilled through the curtains. Hannah stood by the window, her hair loose, coffee in hand. Theodore, still in his robe, came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Clause number 3, he murmured sleepily. "Always share morning coffee." "I was afraid you'd forget." He grinned. "Didn't you know? Your coffee never tastes right without me." She turned and laughed, the sound soft and full. He kissed her forehead. Below, the cafe doors opened for the day. The little bell chimed, the sound of another beginning. A woman who once bowed under the weight of a tray, who once begged a stranger to pretend to be her husband, now stood in a world she'd built with her own hands, beside the man who had once been her boss and was now her partner, her equal, her morning coffee companion. Their story was no longer about contracts or pretending. It was the forever agreement, a promise written not on paper, but in laughter, in forgiveness, and in love that finally, truly was real.